What's up, guy? What is up, guy? Welcome back to Josue Has to Say. If you're new here, I am Josue, and this is what I have to say. Today's episode. Actually, before we start, I want to remind you guys to please like, subscribe, share, comment, do all the things, as it does help the podcast grow. And if you ain't growing, you're rotting. Today's episode, we're going to get real weird. So if you're one of those people that are constantly down my DMs, pushing back whenever I post anything slightly out there, this is not the episode for you. Sign off, or I don't know, but this is not it. Today we're going to go down the rabbit hole. Down the rabbit hole. So as we all know, the internet has been ablaze with truthers, thought provokers, conspiracy theorists, critical thinkers. And for today's episode, I have brought two content creators that I think are subject matter experts on these topics. Welcome to the podcast, Drew Tang and Cooper Campbell.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited. It should be a fun convo here.
It's going to be fun. Tell the people a little bit about who you are and your experience on the digital battlefield.
So yeah, I guess I started making content in 2018 on Twitter and found a niche, and it's been a really cool journey. I was just thinking about this earlier today. It's anytime you start something, you're always starting at the same time as other people, and there's a good chance that some of those people are going to be really good at it. So it's for people that are just starting out, definitely network. And anyways, I started out with people like Zuby and Solbra when they were really small. For people on Twitter,
Zuby blew the fuck up. I remember his account when it was like small.
He actually he shot a podcast. He shot a podcast with me in Atlanta in 2019 when I had like 3,000 followers. So like,
nice.
He's super nice guy. But anyways, yeah. So I basically, my niche is definitely conspiracy theory type stuff, and yeah. So been at it since then. Wrote a book in 2019, and then I'm about to finish my second one. Should be out.
What's the book called?
This month. American Apocalypse X is the second book. The first one is just called Woke.
Oh, I've seen you post it, like American Horror Story type of like, it has a...
Yeah. Similar vibe. It's got
similar vibe.
Yeah.
Right.
Marvel characters has a... Yeah. It's cool. It'll be fun.
Good shit. Coop.
Well, I am one of those relatively new creators. I've just been struggling to survive, like most everybody, I think, nowadays.
We're thriving, baby. We're thriving.
Yeah, thriving at the end of the world. That's where we should be all. But I just recently started wanting to like monetize my brain. Sitting at the kava bar with you, talking with this guy, talking with a lot of people. Like I have a lot to include into these conversations, and I do have a lot of useless knowledge inside of my head when it comes to these sort of really deep hidden truths, let's call them. And so for me, I mean, it hasn't been like a dream or goal of mine to want to make it about myself, but like I think we can all see the rot getting closer and closer to us, and I think that we all, if we really organize and put our citizen badges on, we could really retake control of our society. And so like that's like my aim moving forward, is to sort of use propaganda and use these sort of tools that have been used against us as tools ourselves to fight back against the people who own us, essentially.
That's awesome. That's a great MO when you're starting, your digital battlefield brand.
Yeah, we're gonna take back the reins from our masters, give them a whip or two.
Speak it. So if you're a current or new listener, if you're a current listener, you've seen that I get a little out there sometimes. If you're a new listener, I don't dive that deep into the rabbit hole, but I do have, I question things often, and I have my theories about things. For example, I have questions about the moon landing, things of that nature. So I got to talking to these two guys, and I thought the conversation was really enlightening. One of the first things that we kind of talked about was flat Earth. So nowadays I've seen the cultural shift from people before. If you mention flat Earth, like, oh my God, can you believe it's schizophrenic? And now it's like, oh, come on, like it's toned down. Like now you can see like in people's tone of voice.
Start off, the Earth is not flat. Nobody really thinks the Earth is flat here, right, Drew?
We'll get there.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
We are on the same page on that.
So with the flat Earth, through you guys, was kind of how I found out about flat Earth, how it kind of started, and how it started off through a form of propaganda by the Phoenicians. So you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. They kind of controlled the Mediterranean port, right, where other ships couldn't go out into the Atlantic. So their propaganda was, hey, the Earth is flat. If you leave the Mediterranean, you're gonna fall down, or just some monster gonna eat you, or some shit like that.
Yeah, no, exactly. And the Phoenicians are really, it's kind of wild. Even as somebody who researched history for a living for this long, I really only found out about them in the last few years, and it was because I was looking at. Because I'm another one of my niches is numerology, astrology, and of course at the core of that is language as well. So I was looking up the origins of language and letters and kind of where we get our modern English alphabet, and it all goes back to what sometimes is referred to as Paleo-Hebrew, but it's really Phoenician. And this civilization that we refer to as Phoenicians, they didn't call themselves that. That's just what the Greeks called them.
And the word phonetics. Phonetics is how you pronounce.
It derives from that?
Yes. So Latin roots are, we were talking about semantics. We'll get into that as well. But the word phonetics, that comes from Phoenicians because they popularized the way of speaking that Latin, the language used. And so they kept that title for them, phonetics, Phoenicians.
So what did they call
themselves? Phoenos means fire, and it's red. So they were known to paint themselves with red ochre paint. So that's why they're called Phoenicians. But what's really interesting about this civilization is that is so influential to the point where our modern language, like Phoenician, is such a important part of what makes up our modern language, and yet we don't really talk about them. I had no idea what they were.
I found out through you guys. I was like, what the fuck is a Phoenician?
That's kept secrets.
So what's really interesting about the reason we don't know about them is because of eventually they were conquered completely and taken out. So it started with Alexander the Great. He on his conquest, he sacked the city of Tyre, which was one of their cities, and that made, after that point, the Library of Alexandria became the center of knowledge in the Mediterranean because they took all this shit from Tyre. But
and the Phoenicians were wiped out as an authority, as like a national authority, and their cities or their colonies ended up progressing far past them, and it gets to Carthage, and then we get later down in Rome. But the Phoenicians, they were wiped out before even their colonies, which makes us forget. It's like an extra layer of separation, whereas that's where this knowledge comes from, but it's carried on through multiple nationalities.
The key part of the Phoenician civilization, what made them so good, is because they dominated with their navy. They were the best seafaring nation of the ancient world. And to go back to this point, this original propaganda of flat Earth was because they controlled Carthage, which is so you imagine the Mediterranean Sea going out into the Atlantic Ocean. Right. They controlled the exit point.
Strait of Gibraltar.
And exactly.
So between Spain and the tip of the Horn of Africa right there is where it's this small little, like relative, you look on a map, it's really small. It's a choke point. But the Atlantic's there, and then the Mediterranean is boxed in by this choke point. So
you control that, you control trade. And control
you control the frontier.
Right.
So they didn't want anybody else wandering out into where your money's made, which is you go out to the places, and then we get into like Atlantis and talk about it. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. That's how Plato, where we get the account of Atlantis, is he says it's outside of the Pillars of Hercules or the Straits of Gibraltar, but yeah. So they use that the whole reason they used that propaganda campaign was to make sure that none of the other civilizations, tried to go through them, because they controlled it anyways. They just didn't want people constantly, trying to go through. And I believe there was the one of the first historians who figured it out. The Carthage was out on their navy was gone, so he passed through and he's like, "Whoa, I didn't fall off the side of the earth." But what's really interesting here is that our modern perception of the New World, what we call the New World, and the idea that Christopher Columbus was the first one to go there and trade, because of what we know about the Phoenicians now and some of the new archaeological evidence in the New World, it looks like these guys were trading with the peoples of North and South America way, way, way earlier.
Really?
And they were lying to the rest of the Mediterranean in order to control those ports of trade. And what's really interesting, the one biggest thing you can point to is people talk about the Bronze Age is a really fascinating era of history. And of course, dominated by these Phoenicians and their various offshoots. But what's really fascinating is that the amount of copper that would be necessary to create all the bronze tools in Europe and the Mediterranean during that time, there's no mines that we can point to in the area that had been extracted or could have been mined.
So they were imported. They had to have been.
Well,
Yeah.
we've also tested it. I can't remember, but I think it comes from Michigan. A lot of this bronze or a lot of this copper that was used to make the bronze comes from Michigan.
Yeah, there's
Ohio.
What?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, so
that's like direct evidence that correlates the two in the new world.
There was passage between.
I don't know about the testing of it. As far as I know, the main thing that points to it being from Michigan is just the fact that there's hundreds of tons of copper missing from a mine in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And basically, so we have in Michigan in the New World, we have a bunch of copper missing and no copper artifacts. And then over in Europe in the Mediterranean, we have a bunch of bronze artifacts, but nowhere that the copper came from. So yeah, that's basically the whole concept that we were talking about, is basically propaganda to gatekeep new frontiers and shit like that.
So it's crazy how an old school propaganda like the flat Earth invented by the Phoenicians still is making rounds. Fucking thousands.
Well, it gets retold.
It gets retold. It's a story that gets retold.
And what's interesting about that little bit of propaganda is likely these other nation states that existed in the Mediterranean, or at least their elite or their oligarchy, the top of their little microeconomy within the grander economy of the Mediterranean civilizations, they likely knew or had the wherewithal to make sense that no, the Earth is not flat and we could go through the Strait of Gibraltar. The propaganda is not meant for the top. It's meant for the the plebeians, the population. It's so the people that make up the economy, who produce the GDP for these nations, they have like the sort of freedom to go about and do things for themselves, and then they bring that income back in. It gets taxed through whatever monarchy they exist in. But that's what the propaganda was for, so that these regular people don't go out and then the Navy, they don't have to spend a ton of money enforcing a Navy to watch the Strait
to keep the
of
masses
Gibraltar.
down.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's really like the important, and also that story gets retold throughout history, retold. It becomes a wives' tale, and you get the Earth is flat. And I remember hearing when I was a kid that they told the people the Earth was flat out of pettiness, like the Queen didn't want to be wrong or something like that, and that's just it's just nonsense.
The Queen was a Gemini.
I don't know the astrology as much as him, but
they're petty.
I'm assuming they're
petty as fuck.
Yeah.
So it's clear as day that propaganda has not died out. Russia is one of the nations that is known for, propaganda. Communist states, Cuba.
Well, that's the propaganda, though, right? The propaganda is that they peddle propaganda. Don't believe anything they say.
Correct.
So that's propaganda.
So it's funny to think that other nations don't exactly exhibit the same practices, right? It's funny. Sometime last year, I saw this TikTok, and it was this German girl, and she was saying how she brought up a book. She was like, "This is a book from our high school." And we learn about American propaganda in our high school. And in America, the word American propaganda, at least at the time, was never even like, those two things were never put together, right? America doesn't have propaganda, or at least you would never think. And then in Germany, it's part of their curriculum in high school, the way that we learn about Russian propaganda in high school, the same way. So with that being said, and seeing the state of the Republic, I think more and more people are, opening their minds up that there could be propaganda in the United States. Kind of piggybacking off that flat Earth stuff, in my opinion, I want to see what you guys think. I have my questions about the moon landing. I know you believe that we actually went to the moon. I think you don't believe we went to the moon. Am I incorrect?
I don't think we went there in rockets.
Okay.
I don't think that rockets are
the Miami audience is just like,
this one took me for a curveball, wasn't it?
Well, I think that's the funniest part about these various propaganda campaigns is what you'll find in if you spend enough time in the spheres, you start to see that people will make conspiracy theories to cover their ass on the real conspiracy theory. So, for instance, when you're talking about when you're talking about flat Earth with the Phoenicians, okay, the conspiracy theory was, it's a flat Earth, whatever. So you're going to fall off the side. But in reality, what they were hiding was, I'm sure some people had the conspiracy theory, there might be land outside of the straits. They're probably just hiding it from us.
It's made of gold.
Those people were probably called conspiracy theorists at the time, thinking, there could be a new world beyond the straits.
Yeah, so crazy.
Or a leper. They might have called him a leper. Who knows? The language.
So what would
touchy
be
subject in Florida right now? Leprosy.
It's true. Yeah. So what would be the end game then of the U.S. Putting propaganda out there that or faking that we went to the moon in a rocket or didn't go or whatever?
So this has been. It was because of the space age. We transformed fundamentally as a Western civilization. Prior to the space age, we were primarily a religious and Christian nation, and really Western civilization as a whole. What followed from the space age, from the spectacle of seeing man go to space, was a worship of science. It became, okay, why do I need to believe in a god or whatever? If we're going to space, man is now, there was a certain level of man is advanced past the need for
a god.
Of a god. Yeah, exactly. And there is the propaganda that went in to get people to accept this was pretty intense. Just to give you a kind of idea of how fast this went. We went in 10 years, they were able to, go from 0 to 100 on the moon. And there's, even inside NASA,
red flag number one, yeah.
Even inside NASA, people are like, this is not going to work. We don't have the technology. The Russians who logged, 100 times more hours than we had at one point, they still have never gone to the moon. And the only missions ever to go outside of low Earth orbit and supposedly pass the Van Allen radiation belt, which is a belt of extreme radiation where
outside the magnetic field of the Earth. So the solar radiation is like 40 times what it is like right inside of it.
Okay.
So to get through that, you'd need an intense amount of shielding, which would be extremely heavy. So that's where you run into the problem with rockets, is because a rocket needs to be as light as possible to get the most out of its fuel. So to put enough protection on the tip of the rocket, it's just not feasible to break.
And also for every pound you have to have a pound extra of fuel, and for that pound of fuel you need another pound of fuel. So it becomes an exponential problem to solve to get like even we just saw the SpaceX. Elon Musk launched the biggest rocket ever launched, and it launched, but it failed.
We'll get to that. I don't want to get there yet.
I'm just talking about the sheer size of what you need to, what he's talking about.
To actually break. But so then no one questions this? Like they don't address, they just...
Well, yeah, so we went in 10 years, magically pulled it off. And in that time, it was Kennedy who started off the space race. So you have this very popular president. He says, we're going to the moon. We do things not because they're easy, but because they're hard.
Right, yeah.
And, hopes were high in America. And, people were feeling optimistic. And then JFK gets murdered. And suddenly the people at the time, they're already distrusting of the government. And to see him killed and then the guy who assassinated him, people right now, we like to think, it's just conspiracy theorists think that JFK was assassinated by the CIA, which, by the way, Biden just announced that he will not be releasing any further.
I saw that.
Yeah,
I saw that because he was supposed to.
Meanwhile,
he went against it.
And Trump was supposed to too.
His nephew is running for president. He doesn't get Secret Service protection.
Right, Robert Kennedy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
even
JFK Jr.
The conspiracy, you have to get through all these other conspiracies.
And JFK Jr. calls it out. He said it.
Yeah. Well, he sent a letter famously. I believe in '94. He sent a letter to then Senator Joe Biden and called him a traitor. And that's in that's a declassified FBI document that you can look up. But
ahead of their time, those Kennedys.
Long story short, when Kennedy died after starting the space race, morale was extremely low. Then they started, pretty shortly after, they got involved in Vietnam, which was one of the things that JFK had. He was a bulwark against and prevented from happening. So suddenly you're back at war again. You're feeling oppressed, but there's one cool aspect that gives you hope. And that's the Kennedy Space Center. What's going on at the Kennedy Space Center, renamed after his death.
The guy that just got killed, yeah.
Yeah. So 6 years later, after he dies, we take off and we land on the moon. And the willingness for people to believe that was extremely high, given that there was psychological trauma. And then there was such
a monumental achievement for man.
And it's that concept is it's a method of rule that goes back to ancient Egypt. And it's, if you ever seen the pharaoh or a sarcophagus where the pharaoh is holding a crook and a flail.
Correct.
The crook is to bring in the sheep, and the flail is to beat away the wolves. Or you could also beat the sheep too. So effective rule is you need to not only be enticing and nice, but you need to be aggressive and disciplinary as well.
Carrot and the stick.
So yeah, it's a good cop, bad cop. So you beat them with the flail, you kill their king, and then you hook them in with this new narrative of space travel.
And increases morale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Increases morale and especially when you name it after them. So that is on a psychological level, on a propaganda level, that's what was going on the surface of the moon landing.
The social aspect of it, from the perspective of the people, at least.
Mm-hmm. But there are some very suspicious things as far as in NASA. James Webb, who was running NASA up until the year before the moon landing, he quits. And why else would you quit if you thought you were finally going to get your crowning achievement and you just up and leave? And which is funny because we just launched our new space telescope is James Webb. It's named after him.
Nice.
But yeah, and so recently, last year, we had the Artemis rocket launch off and do, I believe they said
SLS, right? Artemis is the new space
Before we
mission.
get there, you did mention that you don't think we got, you believe we got to the moon, but you don't believe we got there by rocket. So
I don't know if we got to the moon, but I know for sure it wasn't with rockets.
Okay, so how do you I don't know.
So this is when I was talking about earlier about the what is it called? It's called a distraction. It's called a
Psyop.
Psyop. Basically, you're misleading people. It's the same thing that a magician does,
where they sleight of hand,
where they redirect your attention so that you don't see what they're doing isn't actually magic, but because your attention is somewhere else, they're able to operate what they're actually doing in the background. So, so what the distraction there was okay, everybody, look at these rockets. This is the best technology we can get. Space travel, it's only accessible by spending hundreds of millions, billions of dollars.
Huge rocket for this small little thing.
Mm-hmm. And so that was, that's the only way to do it, blah, blah, blah. And if you notice, there's no other technology where we've regressed after 50 years. 1969, we went to the moon, but right now we still can't. Our Artemis rocket which Artemis moon mission has been pushed back continuously. It was supposed to be,
2014. It was under Obama. I think
that's my biggest red flag is the fact that we've never gone back, and then they claim to have lost the technology or some bullshit like that. Mm-hmm. And it's like, how does that?
They deleted all of their archives,
which is insane.
That's
like, how do you listen to that? And you're like, oh, well, something must have happened.
For me, I don't know. Like, it's hard to argue against that. There's sneaky shit going on.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's where, like, the realist in me takes like looks at it and goes, I don't know about this. The reason why I believe in it, honestly, is because of the propaganda, because it is so feel good. I'm a little bit of a flag waver at times, and there was so much put into the program. So, like, yeah, we did get there in 10 years. Or, well, really, it was less than that. It was 8. He announced in 1961, let's go to the moon, not because it's easy, because it's hard. But and then in 69 we landed Apollo 11, and then we went to the moon 8 times. But there was so much technology that was actually given to the people from like that goal of trying to get to the moon. So there is like actual evidence that we went there. We can actually, they do it all the time. You can ping. They put it's like an octagonal disc on the Sea of Tranquility where they landed, that you can actually ping with a laser.
You could do that with a drone.
All of the okay, true. There is anti-explanations and pro-explanations to all of this stuff. I just personally, I think we went to the moon, but I'm not opposed.
Why do you think that way? Even if you do question all these red flags or inconsistencies, what keeps you saying, "Oh, we did"?
Well, I think it makes sense, and if it is a story that they whipped up for propaganda or for show, I think it's a damn good story. And I don't see how you break out of that story.
So
all these sort of explanations that a little bit with like the flat Earth. So there's a lot of Netflix documentaries, and it's like a flat earther that's going to disprove the Earth is round, right. And then he ends up proving the Earth is flat, through his nonsensical rigmarole that he does to get to there. But like, I've seen a lot of moon landing stuff, and it's like, oh, well, there's no stars in space, or, oh, look, here's a picture of an astronaut's footprint on the moon, and there can't be a footprint in space.
Or the flag waving, or
the flag waving, and all of these have explanations. When you take a photo on the moon, there's not going to be stars because the exposure is so long, and you have radiation coming from the sun that's blinding out the stars. Or with the footprint. Yes, in a vacuum, you're without moisture, you will leave a footprint because you're in a vacuum. So there is explanations to all of these things, but at the same time, there is so much shadiness. So I am totally willing to take a look at it and be like, "Hey,
good." I feel like
there's no.
I feel like most people should think that way. Even if you do believe whatever your belief is, you should have an open mind.
And if the belief is so weak that it has to be like you can't, it doesn't hold up.
Correct.
Under any scrutiny, then it's probably not something worth believing.
You mentioned earlier the rockets require certain not structuring, but barriers or whatever to break the field.
Yeah, shielding.
Okay, so for the radiation,
correct.
Astronauts.
So then, how would?
So I haven't seen like I'm going to say the word legitimate science, which is funny, but I haven't seen like legitimate scientific explanations.
In 2023, legitimate science should be
right.
a thing.
I haven't seen like legitimate scientific explanations about the thickness of lead in which you would need to protect yourself from the solar radiation that's in between Earth and the moon, or just really outside of the magnetic field of the Earth. But just intuitively looking at it, I don't think the thickness of a material would necessarily play that much of a role when you're talking about like solar radiation. But again, this is all under the same lens as the same science that they want us to believe in, like it's a secular religion.
Right.
So you have to really zoom out. You have to the appeal to authority in modern times is really bad as well. But you have to really zoom out when you look at all of this stuff and try and take your perspective like completely blank. Even from like a scientific, like the scientific method is useful, but the scientific method is also their secular religious method. So you have to use your own intuition, and you have to think and think critically,
right.
And you can't be afraid. Like you see this all the time now. There's like the Washington Post or ABC, they put out some hey, don't do your own research, and it's like
so stupid.
That's like the scariest sort of propaganda is convincing somebody who's not stupid to be stupid.
Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah,
well, because they want you stupid.
Yeah.
So then with the rockets and the propaganda at the time.
Oh, he thinks UFOs, by the way. It's long-winded.
Oh, yeah. So,
wait, what?
So that's the misdirection.
Not
rockets.
Saying,
is that
we got there not with rockets.
We got there with UFOs?
So,
yeah. So
the misdirection.
So the idea is there that at that critical point of World War II, where we, from the early 1900s to 1940, we suddenly got everything. We got electricity, flight.
It's a really good point. Yeah, technology boomed.
We went insane, and people are people at the time were coming up with the ideas of like Jetsons type shit. We fought flying cars, floating cities, and
remember
shit.
Those cartoons from the 50s with all the futuristic, like the house of the future. Or
we
whatever
could have that.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah, well, and that's funny because there is a group called Plus Ultra that was Nikola Tesla was a part of, and Donald Trump's uncle, who got all of Tesla's research after he died. The FBI gave it to his uncle.
Why would they do that?
They had him look through it for mainly they were looking through it to try and find this death ray that Tesla was shopping around to different governments during World War I.
But who was the uncle? Did he have acclimations? Or was
he was an MIT professor.
Okay.
Dr. John Trump, and
that was mine.
He's a public figure. You can look him up, and he was mainly in X-rays. And he was the one, for some reason, he was the one that the FBI chose to give the Tesla's research after he died. So what I was saying there is there was this rapid and exponential growth in technology that we experienced at that turn of the century, going in the 20th century. But then it stopped. We completely, in terms of physical stuff, travel,
in terms of growth.
Transportation, basically everything to do with that basically stayed exclusively oil-based. Everything had to still use oil, which was important because that's what our whole world order is based off of right now. The U.S. dollar, after going off the gold standard under oil, Nixon, Nixon was in office during the moon landing. People forget that because he's such a, now disgraced president because of the impeachment shit and Watergate. But he was the one on the phone, on the landline connected to Apollo 11, talking to
right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, that's another thing. When I saw it, I was like, well, how does he talk? He's talking through a landline. to Buzz Aldrin, or whatever the fuck his name was.
I mean, so
I'm sure there's an explanation, but I'll just finish my point real quick.
That's
That
like
was-
the least concerning
that-
part of
that
the
looked- that
conspiracy.
looked off
If we're
to me,
talking
but I'm
about
gonna continue.
So the idea is though that
that red telephone can
that-
do anything, got the best reception, and it's free.
everything that Nikola Tesla came up with, AC power, radio, remote control, which a bunch of people stole, the credit for a lot of those things. He was just completely robbed, and he died penniless. But at one point, they cut him off when he started to look into alternative ways of producing energy. It was mainly at his. He built, I believe it's pronounced Weidelklorf Tower in New York, but it's he built a tower in New York that he told J.P. Morgan, who was his primary funder, he said it was going to be for communication. But then he revealed later that, actually, I'm trying to tap into the Earth's electromagnetic field and use that, use the Earth as my conductor and the atmosphere.
For free energy.
Yeah, for free energy. So wireless energy transfer, which, we have wireless charging now, but you still have to be in contact with it.
With a patio.
So what he was talking about then was, and I guess he never achieved it technically. There is a tower in Texas that I believe it was a university research project that they were trying to replicate it, and I think they ran out of money, but I did go see it, and
That's
I was just trying to take it's just in the middle of a field. You can see it from the highway in between Austin and Dallas.
It's just like an abandoned tower, like just like a monument.
Oh,
basically.
it wasn't abandoned at the time.
No, I mean now currently.
Oh,
Obviously
no.
time.
They destroyed that shit immediately. They wiped out all of.
Oh wow.
I even went to because I went
Just
to
like Carthage.
I went to the New Yorker hotel where Nikola Tesla died on the 33rd floor. I went to. I also went to the site of his lab in Colorado Springs. And they don't even know where it was. They just destroyed it so quickly and sold it for scrap so quickly that they don't even know where that laboratory was. And that was his laboratory in Colorado Springs is where he claimed to have made contact with Martians in 1901. He was experimenting with these different radio towers and shit, and he said he was receiving signals from Mars, which he believed was from Mars, but it could have been from anywhere technically, I guess. But yeah, there's a newspaper headline. I believe it's like the Colorado Springs Gazette, 1901, and it's saying Tesla contacts other worlds.
That was
and now
actually published. Wow.
Colorado Springs is right at the base of Cheyenne Mountain, and Cheyenne Mountain is the headquarters
it's a
of the
bunker.
U.S. Space Force.
Or no, it's NORAD.
Yeah, NORAD and
right.
the U.S. Space Force.
Yeah.
And they literally
And NORAD is what, by the way, NORAD tracks throughout the entire world.
Santa Claus.
Yeah, so that's what NORAD's for. It's where your tax dollars are going. But no, it tracks
Our
like
tax dollars-
anything in the atmosphere.
Our
So
tax
it's like
dollars have gone to worse.
right. It's like a global GPS is given to the world for free by the government, so you're getting your money's worth there as well. But NORAD, it's it was designed to track incoming Soviet threats. So if there was a bombing fleet coming in to wipe out Alaska or
What's it used for now? I mean, probably the same.
No, it's used for the same thing.
It's the headquarters of the U.S. Space Force.
Is it now?
Yeah,
too.
it is,
Okay,
yeah.
Well, either way, but I almost said Musk. Tesla, he had this idea, and he probably didn't mean it literally, but he was thinking in terms of radio. He invented the radio. He was thinking in terms of wireless energy transfer, so to be able to maybe not free energy, but even you could send power from this device to that device far away through a radio signal, it's looking to catch that. And he had this idea that all of his ideas, which came to him so naturally, including alternating current or AC versus direct current, which is Edison. This is a whole fight, fascinating to get into in itself. But he got this idea like that, and he had this idea that angels were sending him musings or ideas from heaven. And so it's not surprising that he was supposedly in contact with other beings.
Yeah.
He probably had knowledge. I mean, they destroyed everything so quickly. The people who are in charge, they do that to people who challenge them,
or a threat,
or
to the system,
it's always a lot
the way
simpler.
things are.
Occam's razor is the idea that the simplest answer is often correct. So Occam's razor is a very important tool to like distinguish what's most likely the case when it comes to a lot of this conspiratorial stuff. And the reason why they tore this down so quickly is because he threatened them. He threatened them from day one. They allowed Edison to get away with stealing his ideas through the patent office. And this is like, the fascistic part of the corporate fascistic superstructure, these oligarchs who marry themselves for economic advantage to people who are within the deep state itself, or the people are in the deep state. So same with what he's talking about. We need oil for everything. It's because oil's running the world for so long, and these people are so rich that they're not even named on any government database.
Right.
They own the government. The Saudis right now own 42% of the global oil reserve. They are the richest people on the planet, bar none. They when the Saudis, they go to any country, forget being diplomatically immune. They can do whatever they want, and they don't get any problems because it would be such an issue to arrest a Saudi royal prince.
Because
like they would get cut
it's the
off.
level of power they have. Yeah.
Yes. So with what he's talking about, we always needed oil. It's a very simple explanation. The people in charge, they don't want to they don't want to sell off their interest in getting that dollar, and therefore we're going to stay on oil.
Stays the same.
And you can get into Roswell and the reason why he's talking about we didn't get to the moon with a rocket is because all of these technologies. And by the way, the Nazis, prior to World War II, the Nazis, they were running around the globe like picking up every rock. They were in the Himalayas. They were in India. They were in Africa. They were
the whole concept of Indiana Jones. What you see in those George Lucas movies is what was actually going on. The Nazis were actually traveling the world looking for ancient advanced artifacts.
And then coincidentally, as soon as war starts up and Germany or the Third Reich is threatened, they are suddenly producing wonder weapons, which are weapons of mass destruction or weapons capable of having a force multiplier on the battlefield, and this is all through technology. So the idea is pretty simple: is that they found things when they were going out in these archaeological digs, and they're scientists. Not that they were visited by aliens or
they just found stuff,
they found things that were long forgotten, secret technologies. Even going back to when we started talking about the New World, there's the Younger Dryas impact theory. You can look that up. It's basically that there was a prior civilization, advanced like us, but in a different way. And who knows what sort of technology was uncovered? Mm-hmm. But that technology, just like with at the beginning with the Phoenicians saying, "Hey, the world is flat." Even if there's interest here, and these interests don't align, they're going to keep that lie going. Because
why would you disclose it? What benefit does that bring you to zero?
Right. So when we talk about so after World War II, you get Roswell. That's 1947, and that's like a flying saucer crashes in New Mexico.
Yeah.
And since then, the United States' people have been, well, really the world, we've been fascinated with this idea of aliens and extraterrestrial object or UFOs. Mm-hmm. And the idea, to just put it concisely, is that if we did go, I'll let you say your own bet.
Yeah, so the 1947. Getting to 1947 is it's the most important year for all of this. So when I was talking about misdirection again before, they want you to focus on certain things. They want you to think that rockets are the only way for space travel, or rockets are the most advanced technology. You want to be a rocket scientist. That's what you want to do. If you have high hopes to be a
top of the totem pole,
to be the best, you want to go
literal totem pole.
You want to go work for NASA. And all these Tesla technologies that they suppressed, where we basically flatlined technologically. We do have really cool things like fucking foldable screens and
That's pretty cool.
and all this shit.
It's really cool for $799.99.
We went we went micro instead of macro. So anything to do with energy, we basically completely stopped. And now nuclear is actually pretty awesome, but now they're reneging on that as well.
Well, because you're advancing kind of like the consumer. You're not advancing the race or the collective.
Yeah, and you're not creating more wealth for them.
The owners' wallets.
Well, right, but I mean,
that's the whole point, is that it makes them money. And because nuclear energy, like, they talk negatively about nuclear energy, but if you like do up all the numbers, nuclear energy kills less people per kilowatt produced than anything else, even with all the disaster, with Chernobyl, with Fukushima, with all of these things. So,
and windmills and all this other shit is completely useless.
It kills the birds.
But yeah, so the 1947 though, to get back to that, the misdirection that everything we saw with NASA and rockets, and we haven't gone back in 50 years, and Artemis is still pussyfooting around, is because
Artemis is the new moon rocket.
Yes.
For those that don't.
So
New Apollo.
Apollo is the sun god. That was what we did originally. And Apollo, again, the Apollo missions are the only human missions ever to take humans beyond the Van Allen radiation belt. The only ones. Apollo is the sun god, and then Artemis is the moon god's sister of Apollo. But all this misdirection is to keep you from wondering, if there's better ways of travel, which we, basically have, again, we're basically still running Model Ts. Except for Tesla, except for Tesla. Yeah,
That's
except
so
for
funny,
literally
yeah.
Nikola Tesla is the only advancement. But so here's the deal. 1947, the war's ended, but we're still trying to track down Nazis, because there's thousands and thousands of Nazis unaccounted for. So, and Nazis, they're extremely good at submarines. So they have a ton of submarines. They can, go under the water. They can leave, they can basically undetectable, and they can go all around the world. And as far as what's been actually documented, there's documented cases of Nazi submarines washing up on the shores of Argentina.
They weren't using Logitech controllers, I don't think.
No, they didn't blow up. But yeah, the Titanic.
It's wireless also. Edison wouldn't have liked that.
That's a whole nother conspiracy theory in itself. They also did have New Schwabenland, their settlement in Antarctica, which is right next to Argentina.
The Nazis.
Yes, the Nazis. Yeah. So, and in Antarctica, this is another scientific fact. People think of it as a complete ice wasteland, and like the shoreline's like, it's ridiculously high. It's like you roll up to it at points, and it's just a complete ice wall. But what happens is there is geothermal vents that create these warm air pockets underneath the ice. They melt the ice and then have warm water, and basically ecosystems where bacteria and other living things can thrive. So, but of course, they're underneath the ice and, undetectable from flying over or whatever. So there is a expedition in February of 1947 led by Admiral Byrd. It's a scientific expedition called Operation High Jump.
Is that the inner Earth thing?
That's the spin. That's the spin.
Okay.
But just looking purely at the facts of what we know for sure. He says it's a scientific expedition, and yet he brings 5,000 troops, aircraft carriers, fleets of planes, and yeah. So it's clearly, he says it's a scientific expedition. Yeah. It's clearly not. So he goes on the expedition. But the expedition ends early for non-disclosed reasons, or I'm sure they have an excuse. But it ends early. They come back early. On his way back, he gives one interview, I believe, either in Chile. Well, Chile or Argentina. I forget which one it was. But he gives one interview to a local newspaper, and he says, in this age, we have to worry about, like, America is no longer safe just because there's an ocean in between us. There's advanced technology where you can fly around the world in just a couple of minutes or whatever. That's the gist of his interview. When he gets back, so that was February of 1947.
And that discovery or that claim that he made was from his trip to Antarctica.
Yeah.
So he found something there that made him say,
yeah. So the idea is, the theory is that he went there to attack and flush out the Nazi settlement there. And it's, like I said, they were all over Chile and Argentina, the Nazis, there's actually a lot of evidence that shows that Hitler himself escaped. There's a whole History Channel series that goes through all the evidence, and it's pretty compelling that that he did actually escape and die there. But
any Argentinians with no family history before 1950 are sus.
It's so funny because it's just like there's so many Italians and Germans and various South American countries, and you just got to wonder why. But so
they're great at marching, though.
They so anyways, that's 1947. Basically, the idea is UFOs pop out and whoop his ass. So he comes back, and then in June of that year is when Roswell happens. So Roswell happens. There's reports of a flying saucer down in Roswell, New Mexico. And then all of a sudden the story changes and the military comes out, cleans everything up. And then suddenly, it was...
Now it's a weather balloon.
Yeah, it's a weather balloon.
I think they changed it like 20 times in between UFO and weather balloon. But the point is that there was a newspaper published, man finds UFO or sees UFO crash. I forget what it was. But by the end of it, by the end of this game of telephone, you get that it was, it's just a weather balloon. Oh, those military guys, they were just out here for what reason? Why was everything shut down? Why was it treated like a chemical disaster where it's all quarantined off? But the idea with all of this propaganda, it's hiding what they don't want to reveal because it would be the antithesis of what their goal is. And their goal is to keep their position on the top. And they do that through economic might, and they do that with
and ultimately a monopoly on knowledge.
Monopoly on knowledge and that technology. If they release something with free energy, now you don't have to work as hard. Now you don't got to keep. Right. Now you have time to go research things for yourself, and you don't have to just toe the company line and accept that the vaccine is good for you.
Well, it's a form of control, and it's a form of also making millions and millions of dollars.
Right. Yeah. It's simultaneous, and it's like in chess, you should move your queen to a square in which it does two things at once. Right. So like anything that's like that synergizes well and does two things at once, it's like literally twice as powerful.
So essentially, the bottom line is that these things are distractions to kind of keep the masses down.
And I'll just finish real quick in 1947. So you had that in June, and then 3 short months later, both the CIA and the Air Force are founded.
Shit.
It was basically to compartmentalize the information. So when people talk about how do you keep...
Well, on paper, what was the excuse? Like it was because...
There's some undisclosed reason,
the CIA it existed before. It was actually called the SS or the
OSS.
The OSS.
I didn't know that.
I forget what it stands for. Something Secret Service or something.
Yeah.
But it was just rebranded as the CIA. And that was because of the Soviet threat. And the Soviets, they got the bomb in 47 as well,
Office
or 48.
of Strategic Services?
Yeah.
Strategic Services. But they got rebranded for that reason. But it was the Air Force, it was the Army Air Force before.
Yeah, it became its own branch to compartmentalize. So the important part about compartmentalization is when people ask, okay, if these things happened, how did they keep them a secret? Like, for instance, if NASA was producing rockets that couldn't possibly make it to the moon, actually, then how did they get away with it? And how you get away with it is you keep everybody on a need-to-know basis. Each person is just building one part of the rocket. So they don't know the overall, they don't know the details of the entire thing. So they never get a full picture to figure out what's actually going on. And this was the same operational security that they were running during the Manhattan Project when they were developing the nuclear bomb for, Oppenheimer and the boys were whipping this up, is they compartmentalized it so it didn't come into the public knowledge. When Truman was elected president, he had to be read into the Manhattan Project.
Truman wasn't elected. That's the other thing.
Even as a military general, he didn't. Or sorry, no.
You mean Eisenhower?
Yeah, I was talking about. I was talking about Eisenhower, but no. He was. So Truman had to be read in when he
took over. When he took over, Roosevelt died during. That's why he wasn't elected. He was the VP for Roosevelt. I think he ran. Got his own term after that, but not important.
But I was. Yeah. Anyways. So you compartmentalize the information, and that keeps it from
leaking,
getting out. So you can have the whole organization, basically everyone in the organization thinks everything's kosher. They have no idea what's going on. That's the same. That is why they had the CIA and the Air Force founded right after Roswell. So they use that event as the impetus to, okay, we need organizations that we can hide this information in. And yeah, so that's basically where that is, if you want to point to where the breakaway civilization, that's ultimately what I'm getting to here, is that there is all this stuff, flat Earth, NASA itself, all these things, and aliens in general, the idea that they're aliens that are in the UFOs instead of just...
you don't believe in aliens?
No.
At all?
So aliens themselves, there's no reason to think, yes, UFOs are real because we spotted them, they're on camera.
Yeah, they could be government vehicles.
And yeah, they are, there's no reason to believe that they came from outer space. There's no reason to think. But that's just because of the amount of programming we have, that because of it's only because of Star Wars, George Lucas again. You remember talking about Indiana Jones?
Yeah, correct.
George Lucas, which that whole plot is based off of a book by Aleister Crowley called Moonchild. But that's ultimately what all of this is
predictive
this
programming.
It's this big narrative they've been spinning since World War II, because ultimately all the world wars, what they really wanted was to continue to centralize power. So after World War I, they started the League of Nations, but they didn't have enough control to get the U.S. to join. So that failed, and ultimately World War II. Then World War II, now Europe is really messed up, and America is now stronger than ever. Huge amount of infrastructure. They're now powerful enough to...
enforce the United Nations.
Yeah.
Or back it up.
So then they have the United Nations, which was donated by... land donated by the Rockefellers, is where they have the headquarters. The Rockefellers were funding both sides of the war. They taught the Nazis eugenics. They were supplying them fuel for their airplanes through neutral Sweden. Anyways, so they start United Nations. Then you have two superpowers. You have Russia, you have the United States, or you have Soviet Union and United States. So now you're down to two powers. Before you had all these various decentralized
great powers.
nations.
It wasn't superpower before World War II. It was great power.
So you have two, and then eventually you have the Cold War, and the Cold War ends with communism failing in the Soviet Union, right. And now you have, since then, effectively, we've had one global superpower. So the problem is we have one global superpower, but the people who are in control still have a couple of loose cannon nations that don't follow absolutely everything that we say. So
or that they say.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, exactly.
This top-down authoritarian, this outside extra governmental control. So again, the people like the Rockefellers, people who really own the shit, and they use government influence, which again, people in government.
And a lot of Rockefellers were in the government too. They were vice presidents. They were all over the place. Senators.
Right. They use that title, but the government agent or somebody who's in the government is supposed to be a representative of you and me,
the representative
and
for
us.
those with power. Yeah.
But what ends up happening is that these are people that end up doing the bidding nowadays through lobbying, which is just legalized corruption. They do the bidding of the people who are really in charge or their interests. So the Rockefellers, they're in this and this and this, and this, it would be good for business if this happened, and therefore that ends up happening, even though it kills 3,000 kids in Ohio because the train derailed or whatever, Like,
well, it's all about power at the end of the day, right?
Right. But that's the idea of centralized power, which is becoming more and more prevalent, and now you have the World Economic Forum, which again is not governmental at all, yet all of these really important people flock to Davos every year to go to a World Economic Forum meeting. Also, the guy who runs it is was his family in the Nazi?
I'm not 100% sure. I
can't remember, but there's something wrong with what's his name?
Klaus Schwab.
Klaus Schwab.
But let's not. Okay, go ahead.
No.
Finish up.
So that's where we are right now. One global superpower, the United States, but there's still, it's not like the United States. Basically, you can see right now, with what's going on in Europe. NATO is essentially just a bunch of vassal states for the U.S. When the U.S. says, okay, you guys are going to war, start pumping in millions and millions of dollars. Yeah. And even when Zelensky was trying to negotiate with Russia to end a war in March of 2022, the U.S. just sends in their little lackey from the U.K., what was that, Boris Johnson? Sends him in, and he puts the kibosh on the whole thing to keep the war going. And now we're closer to nuclear war than any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and basically that World War II ended, and this is where a huge amount of the U.S.'s power and dominance came from, was being the only country with nuclear weapons. Then the Soviet Union got nuclear weapons, so then there's two powers, right. And then essentially it's kind of gone down since then, but. That's how World War II ended, was with a nuke. And we really didn't need to use it to end World War II because the Japanese were basically done for anyways. But essentially, World War III will end with UFOs, and ultimately... And you can see Reagan and Bill Clinton basically read the same script, which the idea is, imagine if we were faced with a threat from outside this planet, how quickly our differences would erode away. And it sounds all nice and good, like, world peace. But world peace is domination by one power. That's the only way you can, you could have world peace otherwise with cooperation, and maybe if there wasn't a, parasitic ruling class that's leeching all the wealth from everyone else. But, so essentially the whole point of, again, the distraction since 1947, and, there were sightings of UFOs before called Foo Fighters in World War II. But since 1947, at least, which I point to as the start of the breakaway civilization with the CIA, which basically runs the United States, they killed JFK.
Yep.
And, the Bush family ran the CIA and then was vice president, then his son was president. They've been running the country since, and essentially what they're trying to do right now, like this congressional hearing with the UFOs earlier this week, they are going to say
introducing the idea.
That the things in the UFOs are aliens. And they're not, because imagine the difference. And again, the only reason why we immediately think, this must be an alien
because
with
we've been introduced
advanced
the
technology.
Idea already.
Yeah, because that's all they've shoved down our throats since they introduced the idea of UFOs. So really what it is a breakaway civilization that does have extremely advanced technology, but what they're going to purvey to us is that they're going to, they might even throw...
When you say a breakaway civilization, kind of like elaborate a little bit on that.
So a breakaway civilization is the idea that you have a group of an existing civilization, but they develop so much more advanced technology than the rest of it that they see no reason to share it with the rest of the civilization, and instead they break off and use it for their own advantage and monopolize it.
Or even interact. like in any other way that's not clandestine or through control.
These this breakaway civilization, what you're saying is they're from Earth.
Yes.
Okay.
And
So that's
where they're getting their money from is the missing Pentagon money. So September 10th, 2001, Donald Rumsfeld goes on TV and he tells everybody, the Bush administration, goes on TV and he says, yeah, we're actually missing $2.3 trillion from the Pentagon budget. Don't know where it is.
Yeah, it happens every year.
Next day, a plane flies into the accounting department of the Pentagon.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And so
it's so funny to say it out loud.
crazy.
It really is.
So that is how, and actually that was 9/11 was part of the reason NORAD, we were talking about NORAD.
Right.
At NORAD, in Cheyenne Mountain, they were running 6 different war game scenarios. So there was actually fake blips on their radar screens, so they couldn't tell what was real and what was fake. And they were even running a simulation of a terrorist hijacking of a plane. Anyways,
Wow.
the breakaway civilization, they siphon off money through the Pentagon because the Pentagon had never been audited before. Trump put it up for its first audit in 2018. I personally was excited because I'm like, all right, this is it. This is what's going to start the snowball effect.
They will never allow it.
Where we're going to find that they're going to
them.
have to admit something.
This is
At the time, the estimate, an estimate from a professor at Michigan State University, he estimated that there was at that time 21. It's been 17 years since 2001. At that time, he believed there's $21 trillion, equal to the U.S. national debt at that time, of missing money from the Pentagon. So basically, you can start a breakaway civilization by doing these, by compartmentalizing and then sectioning off the money from the Pentagon and basically just use it to build DUMBs, deep underground military bases, which are, they've had those for a long time. Cheyenne Mountain is kind of one of them. RFK Jr. in one of his interviews recently, he talks about another one in near Washington, D.C., where they would take the politicians and their kids during a potential nuclear crisis, which was just a complete underground city with McDonald's and shit. So essentially, all this is misdirection. They want you to look up and exterior for
Like
both.
the Netflix movie, Don't Look Up.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it's that Netflix movie is so fucking funny
Yeah,
because
it was.
it's literally
It was great.
What's actually going on is the exact opposite of what people think. They show, oh, look at this climate scientist. They're not letting him on. Well, okay, so it's a meteor, and they're not letting the meteor guy go on. And what they're drawing the connection to, the reason the guy wrote that script, star-studded script, was that he wanted it for people to draw parallels between that climate change.
for climate change.
And COVID too. It was COVID too.
Yeah,
sure.
Because it was relevant. But ultimately, this guy's he's David Sirota. Actually, kind of a nice guy, but stupid as fuck. So
he's funny but dumb.
So anyways, the movie is about science. There's a meteor coming, and a scientist is trying. I think there's also a Michigan State scientist in there.
Mm-hmm. That's where they all are from in that movie.
Great school to party at, by the way. Anyways, they won't let him on TV to tell everybody about the meteorite coming because it's like, oh, there's too doom and gloom. Nobody wants to hear about it. So they kick him off, and all the people are like, oh my God, this is exactly what's happening with climate change. There's people who just aren't listening to the doctors.
Exactly.
They won't let them on TV.
Yeah.
It's like, when in ever has they've not promoted climate change? And in reality, the people that are saying, no, this is another fear porn propaganda move, because just really briefly on environmentalism, what people don't understand is this concept of climate change was put forward initially by employees of the oil companies to put restrictions on new competitors and to let them increase their prices by limiting the supply.
Is that for real?
Yeah.
What year was that?
It was an employee of when the climate change movement first started. This entire
It was in
idea
the
of
80s, I think.
environmentalism.
Yeah.
I would think
It was it was started by the industry itself. And if you look through the dominant philosophies of, what was popular in science in the 1920s to the 1940s, basically till the end of the war, the most popular thing was eugenics. We've got to do, it was
depopulate.
Basically, breed wisely or whatever.
Yeah.
So they did things like involuntarily sterilize people. I believe there's 70,000 involuntarily sterilized in California alone. And the Nazi eugenics program based it off of the American program. I believe in Mein Kampf, Hitler talks about the American eugenics program and saying, oh yeah, this is great. And the Rockefellers funded the Kaiser Wilhelm Eugenics Institute in Germany, where they were teaching all these people about eugenics. So they were trying to depopulate. Then after the war, they're like, oh fuck, we can't use the word eugenics anymore. We can't use the word propaganda anymore because the whole Nazi thing has kind of ruined it for us. And of course, I wanted to bring this up earlier, but propaganda, of course, was an American invention by a guy named Edward Bernays, wrote a book, Propaganda, in 1928. When he wrote this book, the word propaganda had no negative connotation. It has the same connotation as public relations today. He wrote that book. He was the great nephew of Sigmund Freud, the psychologist, and he used basically that psychology. Sigmund Freud's a messed up guy, pedophile, horrible human being, which is where he gets all of his ideas from, where he's like, every child wants to fuck their parents and all this crazy shit. But anyways, it's powerful in some level. So Edward Bernays, his great nephew, writes Propaganda. Basically, his work, there's a quote by him because his work was used by the Nazis to form the cult of personality for Hitler. And there is a quote by him where he's like, oh, I'm so ashamed what it's been used for, blah, blah, blah. His great nephew is the co-founder of Netflix.
Whoa.
Edward Bernays. So yeah, talk about
And
propaganda.
then Don't Look Up produces, or Netflix produces Don't Look Up, and then we're right back to climate change.
Exactly.
But-
So you go from eugenics to environment. Eventually, they're like, "Oh man, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? We can't say eugenics anymore." They use their propaganda methods, and they say, "Oh, I got it. Environmentalism. There's too many people, and their estimates were like, the world's going to be crazy overpopulated by 2000. We got to stop it in the next 50 years." And all this shit.
So this is probably a good time to also bring up semantics itself. So the semantics is use of words.
1 second, Cooper. Hold on. This one's gonna roll over a bit, so just FYI. Okay, just because it's usually an hour or something to let you know,
So semantics is the use of words, like specific words. All the words we use, the English language is rooted in Latin. There's a lot of words that you can sound it out and just figure out what the word means, even if you don't know, just by making like words. Government is one. Govern means control, and ment means mind. So government is control of the mind control for the people that it governs, it controls. But the point of eugenics versus climate change, or the point I'm drawing here, is that they have always, since the dawn of civilization, they have used George Orwell, 1984, which is a commonly quoted book in this modern era where we are so inundated with outside influence, constant children, us. Being bombarded by propaganda through their use of words. So, and another example of this is recently we had Elon Musk come on Twitter. He said cisgendered is a slur on this platform, and this is. I have a mixed bag of emotions toward Elon Musk, but in my opinion, this is a great thing from Elon Musk, because what he's doing is he's combating the establishment or the owner's narrative book or their semantics, because nowadays they want you to wave the rainbow flag, and they want you to allow trans people. They want to normalize transgenderness, which has had an adverse effect on the youth. People are identifying as trans more, which means that they're going to self-castrate or eugenicize their own selves by injecting hormones too early, screwing all their biology up, and making it impossible.
In California too.
And speaking of the Nazis, they were big on the trans thing too.
Hitler was trans.
Before the
I'm like, who?
yeah, when are talk about the book burnings, they don't talk about which books were being burned, and one of the first ones was their little transgender clinic there, which the Nazis took all their shit and burned it. But what's funny is that ideology now, talking about rebranding, like I was saying, it went from eugenics to overpopulation. Then they change it. Okay, overpopulation, that's a bit too much. Like, we don't want people to immediately think, oh, we're trying to depopulate.
Oh, no, let's save the animals.
Then the next one, environmentalism. And so environmentalism, then people are like, oh, cool, environmentalism, that's nice. I want to
protect your home.
How do I do
pick
that?
up your trash.
We're going to depopulate you. Then then they went with climate change. And again, climate change, if you listen...
No, first they went with global warming.
And they talk about, of course, and
then they had to change that
to climate change.
Global cooling,
And then they're like, okay, climate change. But essentially, now you have people, they say, oh, climate change. Well, how do we fix that? Oh, we got to take down carbon emissions. And how do we do that? Well, Bill Gates has a TED Talk where he says the best way to get population down is vaccines.
And reduce population, right?
By using to
chemically castrate.
He says
so many words. See, I get right to it. I don't bother with the semantics.
But yeah, so anyways, that's just another repurposing and another new it's a rebranding. And today we have the transgender push, which is absolutely a social contagion, where people are like, suddenly kids are now immune to anything culturally that's going on. When you ask somebody, you think there's a social component to kids being confused about their gender? And no, they're just born that way.
Yeah,
there's no way they could be an influence. You could make a kid. The kids are malleable. That's why the Nazi youth targeted them. So you get to the kids young, and more importantly, that's what this whole feminism movement was originally about too. Again, by the Rockefellers. There's an interview where a guy says he was talking to one of the Rockefellers, and he was like, you know what feminism was all about? It was about getting the women out of the house so that we could program their kids all day. And that's the most important part. So, we came up in the school system, or at least I did, and they're putting, at home, my dad was like, all this climate change bullshit, it's, ridiculous, and fucking Obama's a piece of shit. And I was, no, Dad, I'm smart. I got rewarded at school for knowing the opposite.
School told me different.
You take that to the next step, and suddenly they're coming home and they're saying that I'm not a boy or I'm not a girl anymore. And that's all because it's a social fad that's being perpetuated by everything you see on the screens, which is super popular with kids. And because they saw it, now they're going to repeat it. And then because the cool person in school who has the most followers, who decided to champion this trans movement, now, he did or she did it, so I should do it. It's this perpetual thing where suddenly you have millennials identify, like, I think it's like 10% identify as a LGBT, gay, whatever the fuck. And then the next section, the Gen Z, is at like 21%.
It increases.
And what happens eventually is you have all these people who are not having natural sex, and they're not reproducing, and they're not making more children, thereby depopulating and getting what you want.
It's ridiculous to think that, at least to some degree, there's no social engineering to kids when it comes to this. Like,
it's complete.
They're for sure, even if you don't want to use...
They used to make laws. They used to make laws against it. You remember when you were a kid and you would watch Nickelodeon, and it would be the commercials, and it would say, hey, make sure you ask your parents before you go on our website.
No, it's the opposite.
It's by law. Otherwise, no, there's no law written for the internet. It's completely, it's a frontier. It's lawless, and they want to keep it that, I don't know if they want to keep it. They want to keep it that way so long as there's something to extract. Once it gets founded, once people populate it enough, then they're going to snap to with the laws, because a law is not for them. A law is for you, so that you can't become them.
100%.
That's it.
So you mentioned Elon earlier, and we were talking about rockets, and this is something that I wanted to kind of visit as well, because I've seen that you have various threads on Elon and on the rockets and all this stuff. So we talked about, the moon landing, the rockets being a spectacle, as distraction type of thing. Why would Elon be involved in... He's a brilliant guy, right? And he's such a center of our society and civilization nowadays. He's like a front man type of thing. What if this guy's brilliant? If he knows there's no breaking out of it with a rocket, then what's the point of SpaceX?
So yeah, it's the same thing as the point of NASA was originally, which was distraction. So
NASA 2.0.
So it's a great spectacle. It's literally it's the greatest spectacle on earth. Look at this huge thing that's blasting off and
giant firework
going to the moon. Yeah, this huge phallic structure that's blasting off. And Jeff Bezos' one really looks like a cock, which is hilarious.
It looks straight like what is that, Austin Powers?
Yeah,
where they're it's a Johnson.
Dr. Evil.
It looks
Dr.
exactly
Evil's,
like that.
Yeah. So and that actually gets to it. I'm not going to go into it right now, but it's called the Killing of the King ritual, which I kind of alluded to before with JFK, it's this concept that's used in governance, and it goes back to, again, ancient Egypt, where at one point the religion in Egypt changed to the cult of Osiris. And basically, in that cult, they would say the previous pharaoh who died, he becomes Osiris in death, but on Earth, he represents Horus, which is the resurrection of Osiris. Basically, in the myth, Osiris is cut up by Set into 14 pieces. The pieces are scattered. His wife, Isis, reassembles him, which represents the moon, Isis.
With a fake cock, right?
She makes him a fake cock. She makes him a gold cock.
So out of context.
And then they use that to impregnate her, and then they have Horus, which is Osiris. Because he doesn't have his cock, he can't stay in the land of the living, so he rules the underworld, and then Horus, his son, goes and defeats Set, and becomes the representation of the pharaohs while they're living. So, but he rules by the authority of Osiris, the dead one. So, and of course, in ancient Egypt, the obelisks would represent the cock of Osiris. They had previously been, before the Osiris cult, they would represent the rays of the sun of Ra, the sun god Ra. But after the cult of Osiris, the kind of concepts changed, and these obelisks continued to be taken and repurposed by civilizations since then. So for instance, the obelisk in front of the Vatican. Why is there an Egyptian obelisk in front of the Vatican?
That's
a pagan,
it was stolen,
a huge
right?
pagan.
It was actually moved there from Alexandria.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yep, and it was moved from Heliopolis to Alexandria by Cleopatra, and then it was moved to the Vatican. Yeah. So actually, that might have been Cleopatra's Needle that I was talking about. I believe a different emperor brought the Vatican obelisk, but that obelisk was what the Vatican is now is built on what was called Nero's Circus. So Emperor Nero, he was persecuting the Christians, and he crucified the first pope, Peter. He crucified him upside down in Nero's Circus. And that's why if you see an upside down cross, they refer to it as Peter's Cross, St. Peter's Cross.
Right.
And that obelisk was there at that time and now is still there, and they just put a cross on the top of it. Now instead of a pagan monument, now it's seen as a great Christian monument, which is, it doesn't seem right. And that's because that's building a tall structure, a monument like that. It gives a physical, especially when you have something to memorialize, like, for instance, Jesus in this point, which they put the cross at the top of it. It gives people a physical object to remind them of whose authority is really running things. So instead of rebelling against their current leader or treating him fairly, essentially, they give him a break because they think, oh, well, the Pope, he's just ruling by Jesus's authority. He's doing his best. I'm not really being subservient to that guy. I'm being subservient to my martyred king, Jesus, or Julius Caesar, which the Romans only adopted Christianity 300 years into the empire. Basically into the empire. Yeah. So that same concept is what they did with JFK. The CIA kills JFK. Then they rename the Space Center, the Kennedy Space Center,
After him.
and then they launch, using the trauma created by his death, they launch the rocket under his authority, and the public is willing to accept it. So what Musk is doing right now is basically the same thing. One of the reasons that people respect him so much is he's going to space. He literally took over. The space program was dead, but then SpaceX came around, which they still get all their money from the government anyway.
And resurrected it.
Yeah. So, and now the cocks that everybody are watching are Elon's cocks, and they're super cocks because they fly back down afterwards.
They got big voluminous balls to land on safely.
They still haven't gone to the moon, but the original concept, to get down to the very core of what the Apollo moon mission was about, was this concept of just like Osiris had the artificial cock to impregnate Isis and make Horus, the rocket represents, represents Osiris. Isis is the feminine moon, which controls the menstrual cycle, and that creates the moon child, Horus. So we were talking about Crowley before.
His book, Moonchild.
Yeah, and so he wrote a book, Moonchild, which essentially...
Well, give a little background on who Aleister Crowley is.
So Aleister Crowley is probably the most prolific occult, magician of the last... I think probably to this day, I would think he's probably the most...
He's the goat chaos magician.
Yeah. He has relations to
he's a Michael
student that is related to NASA, right? Jack Parsons.
So one of his students, Jack Parsons, who created liquid rocket fuel, he started Jet Propulsion's labs, which then became NASA. He was a student of Crowley, and Parsons actually did a ritual in the Mojave Desert in 1946 called the Babylon Working, which was basically the goal was to create a moonchild, to rule a new Aeon of Horus, is what they called it. That was the new age they wanted to bring in. What was most important, and why it was so important to use the rockets, is it was a new type of phallic structure. It wasn't the obelisk. It wasn't repurposing an Egyptian obelisk. The American Empire was, the Washington Monument was completed after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. It was being built previously, but it wasn't finished until.
So after.
And then it became this symbol of a new united America.
The biggest cock of all.
Where people are like, oh, well,
yeah,
and it's a big
Abraham
white cock,
Lincoln, he's the best president ever. He became a martyr. And that's essentially, on a ritualistic level, that is why they used rockets, even though they know it doesn't go to the moon. And Musk is a bit different because he's trying to go to Mars, which is Mars in ancient Egypt. They called it Horus of the Horizon, or and I believe there's another name like Burning Horus or some shit like that. But essentially, Elon is the moonchild that they were trying to summon. And if you want to look for evidence of that, the other
Scientist.
Jack Parsons was the student of Aleister Crowley.
Right.
He was liquid rocket fuel, Jet Propulsion Labs. Wernher von Braun, the other main head of NASA, who's the chief architect of the Saturn V rocket that Apollo 11 took to the moon.
Former Nazi.
Stolen
Operation Paperclip.
Mm-hmm.
So we brought him in, and then
I'm
we
aware
forgave
of
his war
Paperclip,
crimes. Well, maybe
The U.S. brought over a bunch of Nazis under a...
Yeah, a minimum of like 1,400, probably more.
Yeah, we forgave him so that he could,
And in 1948, once he had come to America, the same year that Elon Musk's mom was born, he writes a book called The Mars Project. And on page 100... Werner von Braun.
Von Braun. Okay.
Werner von Braun, already in America, 1948. He writes a book called The Mars Project, where it's about a human colony on Mars. And when he talks about how Mars is governed, he says the leader of the human Mars colony will be given the title Elon.
That's fucking crazy.
And that was
so
what's
crazy.
even funnier is that, remember we were talking about Operation Operation High Jump. He based that book off of the details of Operation High Jump. He based it because it's like they went to Antarctica with that much supplies so that they could, effectively, maintain an ecosystem and survive in the harsh environment.
Right.
So he used that same type of structure
Playbook
in the Mars Project, except he was a Nazi, so he knew that the Nazis were down there, a high-ranking Nazi SS member. So he knew the Nazis were down there with UFOs and then made a book just to mock them afterwards about taking rockets to Mars.
The ultimate troll.
Yeah.
And
say what you will about Nazis, but they got a sense of humor.
And then he writes Elon, and now this is to get to the core of what Elon represents, is that there's a concept called technocracy, which is the idea of rule by the experts instead of democracy or some type of decentralized form of governance. So instead of the community making decision as a whole and like trying to figure out the best way to as a big group, instead in a technocracy, you have one expert and they run the whole thing with no oversight. So that sounds great. And people to this day, people still think, oh, it's cool, especially when they look at Musk. Because what did Musk do? He took the defunct NASA and now we have rockets going up again. Electric cars. No one could pull off an electric car company.
He did.
Somehow he did. Everybody doubted him.
Resurrection.
Satellite internet, Starlink. He gave the Ukrainians a Starlink system so that they could, he was affecting the outcome of the war. And he also has, the Boring Company. He's making underground tunnels, which again, kind of goes into the dumb thing. But, he's and then of course, Twitter. Now he's Donald Trump, the president, couldn't even keep himself from getting kicked off of Twitter. Elon Musk bought it and controls it. So in terms of being a technocrat, he is the absolute wet dream of a technocrat. And the thing is, Mars was in the Mars Project. It describes Mars as being a technocracy, being run by a group. How Mars is governed is actually the chapter that they mention the title Elon, and they basically describe a technocracy in there. And Musk tweets over and over again, we need to make the Martian technocracy a reality.
Yeah, I've seen it.
So and now here's the real kicker, again, to point to something that is not complete hearsay as far as Musk being, his life being a role and not being, a genuine random series of events, is his grandfather, Joshua Haldeman, in Canada, was arrested in 1940 during World War II for being a potential threat to the government for running the Technocracy Party of Canada. Wow. So he literally, so this is not an accident.
It's in his blood.
And the thing is, also, the Technocracy Party, the movement, was international, and it had a section in Germany. And if Werner von Braun was writing a book about a Martian technocracy as being the best way to go about it, of course he was familiar with the leadership internationally of the
technocratic party.
Yeah. So it's 100%. It's not even a stretch of the imagination. Oh, yeah, hey, we're trying to... Oh, by the way, he was great friends with Parsons as well, obviously, because he was in NASA and the rocketry. But they were longtime friends. They were like pen pals when he was in Germany.
That's crazy.
And
how it all ties back.
Yeah, so Parsons like, hey, we're trying to do this new thing. We're trying to create a technocracy, and the most important part is we need one really good leader to take it. And so to form a one-world government, you also need a good leader. And that's what Julius Caesar was for the Roman Empire. And that's why, just like, how in the book, they're saying Elon's not the name of the guy. It's the title they give him. The same way that all the emperors were referred to as Caesar.
Mm-hmm. It's a title.
And every time you said Caesar, you weren't saying, oh, I'm submitting to Julius Caesar, or I'm not submitting to the current guy in power.
You are the resurrection of Julius Caesar. Mm-hmm. You are the body, just like you're talking about with Osiris and set and all that.
Yeah.
This idea that like the pharaoh is the living embodiment of a god here on earth, and Caesar. So after Caesar died, he was Mark Antony literally said like, I'm sorry, not Mark Antony. Augustus Caesar or Octavian literally said like, there was a shooting star. It was the Hale-Bopp comet going over, and nobody knew what this was. It comes out around every 75 years, and they saw this thing, and they said, the people are wondering what this is, and Octavian uses this natural, crazy, random event to say, oh, that was Caesar's soul ascending into godlyhood. So, and you have to also understand, at the time, the Roman Republic, which Caesar never killed, has fallen, and it has become an empire. And the oligarchy, which killed Caesar, they kind of won because they got to keep their standing. They got to keep their money and their economic might, or their enforcement over the plebeians. So the optimates, the bourgeoisie, they got to keep their standing, and all they have to do is swear fealty to the emperor, and they just they change the words around a little bit, and they get to keep their same grift going. And so the people, not understanding what this is, and Octavian obviously knowing that this is not the soul of his posthumously adoptive father going up to be a god. He's just painting this as more propaganda to enhance his own image as the son of a god. So that's convenient. And then so like what you're talking about,
he literally goes on to Egypt to kill Caesar's actual blood son with Cleopatra, and ends the pharaonic line of thousands and thousands of years. That was the last pharaoh of Egypt, was killed by the first emperor of Rome. So Rome completely inherited not only
Ptolemy the 13th, I think, right?
all of Italy's past empires, and essentially Greece as well, like that type of mantle. But they destroyed Egypt's, and because of that, because the pharaonic line was broken, it never reemerged, and that's why it's so important. This concept of ruling by the authority of the previous one is so important, because it makes your leadership position immortal.
It gives it clout. It gives it like actual standing in the memory of the people that you're governing.
Immortal,
yeah, right. Yeah, because otherwise, who are you to tell me what's going on? Oh, well, I'm related, or I am the after image of that guy who your parents listened to. So even in your own personal life, your only authority here on earth is your elders that you respect and honor, your parents. Or your grandparents, and they swore fealty to this person, so I better be swearing fealty to the guy who's the successor to that. And that's just propagated throughout history.
Kennedy was the first Roman Catholic president too, by the way. So as far as the this concept of Rome never fell, and Washington D.C., the land that Washington D.C. was built on, was originally called Rome. And,
is it really?
Yeah, and Capitol Hill, that comes from Rome, because they have a Capitol Hill.
So wait a second. Let's park the Rome thing really quickly, because I wanted to briefly visit
Mars.
No, Mars.
Just stopping for a bit.
Twitter X. I saw that you had a thread on Elon Musk and X, SpaceX, now Twitter X. I wanted you to speak a little bit about that, and then I want to close out the episode with Rome Never Died, which is our
nice the overall theme here. So X, to go back to the Phoenicians, the first Christians, so the earliest Christians, they were using the Paleo-Hebrew, aka the Phoenician alphabet, and the last letter in the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet is the X. And further on in time, it morphed into a T. Literally the X letter of the Phoenician alphabet, but it was the last letter, and it represented the ultimate omega perfection. So they were using X. If you look at these most ancient Christian houses, there's like a History Channel episode on it, and they show you that there was there's an X above the altar, which they were using to represent Christ. So when you think about Musk and the idea of X is exchange. It's the merging of poles. It's the crossover, which is a powerful concept in itself. But why Musk specifically uses it is because the role, so we've covered technocracy and the idea that he is now going to, for all intents and purposes, he's, in terms of favorability, he beats both Trump and Biden. So,
100%.
but he can never be president because he wasn't born in the U.S.
yeah.
So so he doesn't become a threat in that realm, which lets him become a new type of leader, a technocrat. And, like I was saying before, he's more powerful than a president. But the other portion to him that's really the most important is he's a technocrat, yes, but what he represents is transhumanism. The idea that humanity will enhance itself by completely merging with machine. And, he's obviously going to do that through AI and Neuralink, yeah. So there's all of these... just like he was written about by Wernher von Braun, there's all of these other motifs in our most popular pop culture narratives. Like, for instance, the most expensive movie series of all time, the 22 movies, Avenger movies, ending in Endgame. Starting, the first movie in that series was Iron Man. And in Iron Man, he goes into a cave, injured, and then comes out of the cave, resurrected.
Spoilers
in an Iron Man suit. So there's a big Jesus motif right there, and also there's a scene right before where he explodes a bomb behind him and puts his arms out like this. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the movie, if you look at the cover of Infinity War, they also have him again, arms spread, Jesus pose, with a big halo behind him even. And in the final movie, I'll just spoil it for everybody if you haven't seen it at this point. In the final movie, he sacrifices himself to stop the depopulation plot of Thanos. So he becomes, and then in the comics, though, he's resurrected as an AI. And I'm sure at some point they're going to make a new movie where he's resurrected.
Yeah.
As an AI.
And when Robert Downey Jr. needs some money,
yeah,
they'll bring him back.
He'll be
goes
there.
back to rehab.
They'll go back to the source material and find it.
This is the kicker, is not only was Elon Musk in the second Iron Man movie, Robert Downey Jr. literally admits he based the mannerisms of the character Tony Stark off of Elon Musk.
Shut the fuck up.
Yeah, 100. Literally, yeah. Interviews. Yeah, he says he's not playing the role of Tony Stark. He's playing the role of Elon Musk.
And it's funny because Elon Musk is called the real Tony Stark.
Right. Yes,
that was through
having
intention.
that thought for the first time and being like, "Oh wow, this guy's so dope. He's the real life Iron Man."
Same.
So
look where we're at now.
So the thing is, that motif does not stop there. If you look at all of our major movie series, they're ultimately all based on this same. It's a derivative of the Horus story, where the guy is basically born of a. It's like a virgin birth type thing because technically his father's dead or it's his father's god or whatever. Mm-hmm. But in the Moonchild, the plot of Moonchild is that there's a super powerful child being born, and a section of light wizards and dark wizards are battling over him for control of the kid. And what does that sound like? That's Star Wars. That's Star Wars. That's the whole Anakin Skywalker thing. And where are you familiar with Star Wars? Do you see Star Wars?
Yeah, you know what Star Wars is?
So yeah, dark wizards, light wizards, and they're fighting over the chosen one, Anakin. Yeah. And then you have Harry Potter, which is even more, and she's a fucking English occultist. So of course she posted pictures of the Crowley tarot deck.
J.K. Rowling,
yeah.
Really?
Mm-hmm. So she literally just ripped that right out of the book. And Harry Potter's the even better example. Literally wizards, and they're fighting over him as
the chosen one, the chosen boy, whose parents are dead.
Yep. So yeah, that motif is absolutely everywhere. And there's a couple of other really good examples. The Matrix, same thing. If you watch The Matrix, at the beginning, the movie begins in room 303 with Trinity inside. That's that classic opening scene where she's jumping around and beats them all up. And then the movie ends in that same room where Neo gets shot, and that's where he's resurrected at 33, at 303. And Jesus died at 33 years old, died and resurrected in 3 days at 33.
Oh, shit.
And then something else interesting about the whole Star Wars point. I mean, George, so we were talking earlier about the Nazis and the Nazis running around the world, and that's basically the plot of Indiana Jones. He's always fighting the Nazis who are, for some reason, looking for the Ark of the Covenant, right? George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, they're instrumental in the making of these movies. They like write it together. And if there is some cabal of people who are controlling it and influencing pop culture in order to control the population, they're going to use outlets like these sort of creative minds, directors, to influence the pop culture they're making.
I'm glad you said that because I was just gonna.
Right, and there's a very famous thing, you can go on YouTube and find it right now, of George Lucas talking about Star Wars. He's talking about, he released it, A New Hope, 4, 5, 6, and then he went back when the CGI was better to do 1, 2, 3. It's not better. You've seen that shit? It's terrible. But the point of what I'm saying is he says what I wanted to do. He's really fucking weird, George Lucas, and he says what I wanted to do with 4, 5, 6 and relate them back to 1, 2, 3 is I wanted them to kind of rhyme. And to me,
just practice his
every morning in front of the mirror. I just did it before the podcast, actually. But just looking at it from a very objective outside, like if I'm an investigator, I look at what he's saying there, and I think this is almost something that he's been coached on. That the Star Wars, and he introduced me to the whole thing about Moonchild. But when I heard it, I likened it to this. Moonchild is Star Wars. Star Wars is a retelling of Moonchild. It's rhyming the history, and Moonchild itself is a retelling of Jesus Christ and Horus and all that. And here we have George Lucas literally saying the quiet part, saying, "Oh, I wanted to rhyme my sequel or my prequels with my sequels, and I wanted the history to rhyme, so it all fits together nice." And that to me is it's just evidence. It's circumstantial evidence, but evidence still that this is the intent of all of this is to propagate the same message,
the narrative,
so that they can keep their same power. Same with Octavian. He wants to keep the power, but these people also want to keep their power, and so everybody's going to work together. Everybody past a certain point is going to work together to keep this real, tightly knitted together.
And yeah, to just go off the X part again. So there's what's called a great year, Plato's great year. It's basically the precession of the equinox, which is essentially the stars are moving in the sky. The constellations move throughout the sky over a period of roughly 26,000 years.
That's why a lot of people don't believe in astrology.
Yeah. So each age is approximately 2,100 or so years old. So when we talk about, it just so happened that when Rome restarted the clock, and now we go from the birth of Jesus or whatever, 0 AD or whatever, they literally reset all of history. So now it's year 2000 instead of whatever year you want to make it. That was the beginning of the age of Pisces. And Pisces its symbol is the fish. So now we're moving into, we're on the cusp of going from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. And Aquarius is, some people, it's referred to as the knowledge bearer, the water bearer, but it's also referred to as the knowledge bearer. So where Jesus recruited a bunch of fishermen to follow him, that's the fish thing. Elon is the knowledge bearer. He's birthing AI and bringing Neuralink to basically fuse humanity with all the basis of all knowledge ever. It's AI, the strongest possible source of knowledge. So that's essentially his X. That is his cross. He's in a similar way to where Jesus is. But then again, they did use the X to represent him initially. But that is, at the core, that is what it represents. He is actually the manifestation of an equivalent. His cultural impact going forward will be the equivalent of a Jesus Christ or a Julius Caesar. Both JCs, by the way.
Oh, sure.
And he likes to post this video game called Dos Ex. And in Dos Ex, the main character is a cyborg. Deus Ex.
You're speaking to Spanish people, yeah.
But yeah. Anyways, it's in the game is about a government agent cyborg who finds out that the current pandemic was a bioweapon created by the government, and the same government that made the disease made the vaccine, which, by the way, the NIH, who funded the research in the Wuhan lab, which we can actually see on YouTube now after a few years, which now that even the FBI cites as the most likely source of the virus, the NIH was also the one that created the vaccine, which people think that it was Moderna, it was Pfizer. No, the NIH is actually suing Moderna to get more of the profits because it was their mRNA research that made the technology for the vaccine. But anyways, he posts this picture in the middle of the pandemic. He makes it his profile picture. And long story short, the end of the game, he saves the world by fusing with machine completely. And again, J.C. Denton is the name of the character.
Bro.
So, yeah. So it's it's literally, he's just putting it in your face. The best part about the game is it was made in the year 2000, but the Twin Towers are already missing from a terrorist
Shut the
attack.
fuck
and
up.
they literally go, oh, well.
Wait, what do you mean there's like
in the game?
It's set in New York.
Manhattan's there and the Twin Towers are not in the game?
And specifically, they say, yeah, it was because of a terrorist attack. And, yeah.
Bro. That's fucking wild, man.
But it's the same thing in the Matrix. In the Matrix, you can see if you do a freeze frame, it's really quick. I don't even know how people got this freeze frame because I tried it myself. I couldn't get it. But when Neo's being interrogated at the beginning of the movie, you can zoom in on his ID. And his ID, again, that movie was in 1999. His ID expires on September 11th, 2001.
Yo.
So that's
predictive.
9/11 is a whole other thing, but essentially, and there's a lot of numerology involved in that date. And like I said, they were running simulation on purpose to make sure that there was so much confusion that it would go off. But it's kind of like a marker where you can just say, "Oh, yep, there you go." That's our calling card. We knew what was going to happen. And some people believe that 9/11 was basically the elite's way of memorializing the entrance into the age of Aquarius. That was a new world order because you had two things. Remember I was talking about an X?
Right.
So you have duality and then they destroyed them. Then what did they put up? The One World Trade Center.
One big
So one world government
Merged.
instead of two.
They merged,
and separation, you have one. And that is,
and then they called it the Freedom Tower,
I think they
just like the Patriot
Well, it was
Act.
Freedom Tower originally,
It's good. It's Freedom Tower.
but yeah, exactly. But yeah, so that essentially is his role. Is the technocrat thing is one part, technocrat Mars. That's definitely one of his roles, but the transhumanism aspect is the true. That's what people are going to remember him for.
Well, because it's the merging again one more time of two separate into one.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, a singularity.
Or a cross,
actually, that's what they call it. Is a singularity.
They
is when humans
the cross. That's a great
humans
way
and
to
machines.
crossing together.
Yeah, exchange.
So right before we wrap up, I wanted to make the parallel between Rome and America. So we kind of talked earlier about how Rome had that control over its people and kind of wiped away anything historic that it wasn't in its best interest. And we've seen a lot of parallels with America doing the same. So we had that conversation that Rome never died, and I wanted you to kind of touch on that a little bit.
So when I say Rome never died, and I say that often, I kind of say it with a little bit of pride, but Rome was literally known as the Eternal City. And it's you've heard the expression, all roads lead back to Rome.
Back to Rome, yeah.
They don't just mean that literally, even though literally all roads in Europe, you can trace, you can find any map, all these highway networks go back to Rome. All roads lead back to Rome, including the roads of our narrative and our common lexicon, the language we speak, the histories we tell, the stories we tell. All, at the turn of the last age, what we was just talking about, when it was BC to AD, right before that is the most rich. It's antiquity, the rich history in all of what we got. That's where all of our stories emanate from. Is the dying of the Roman Republic, and if you know anything about America, we are a republic, and a republic is a democracy that's run by representatives who are elected by the people. Rome was a republic in a similar way, but the plebeians, they didn't have. It was different time. They didn't have any power, and they didn't have any upward mobility for the most part, like the really poor people who were just going and cutting bricks all day or whatever. Mm-hmm. But there was a rich middle class that sort of had upward mobility, and that was who became like the champions of tomorrow. Rome, or Julius Caesar was one of these people, and this whole time we've been talking about these histories. We go back, or the modern thing, and then we go back and we make an allegory to something that happened in history. When I say all roads go back to Rome, I'm really talking about all of the stories and the narratives and what we can see happening and we can predict because of it, that's happening right now. They've already happened. All of the wars that happen, they happen for the exact same reasons, and that's because human beings are very. We're pretty solved when it comes. We're a finite source of like inspiration. We fight over only a couple things. We fight only the severe, only a couple over a couple of things. And this war that we're seeing, and the reason why things are so bad and dreary and down, is the same story that's happened over and over again throughout history.
Cycles, patterns.
Yeah. It's called the fourth turning. You've heard of it. It's the strong times, or good men make strong times. Mm-hmm. Strong times make weak men. Weak men make hard times. Hard times make strong men. Right. And we are this age that we're in right now is the fourth turning. We are cycling back into the times being so rough that we have to grow up strong if we're going to survive, and we will bring in the good times. They'll follow us. But getting into Rome, like I could talk for hours on the specifics of Julius Caesar and all that. But
well,
just to make
because
a
I'm
quick,
paying for studio time.
I know. Just a quick story to relate what's going on back to now is at the fall of the Republic, and it turned into an empire. What was going on was,
which is in Star Wars too. That's what the
shit,
prequels
right.
is all.
Damn.
They hunted
all
down
roads.
the Gnostics.
All roads.
All roads.
They all lead back to Rome. And Rome never died. Even Rome itself, by the way, it changed hands a million times, but the city, the power it emanated, it never changed. Even now, the Vatican is where in Rome. But what we have going on right now, the dying of a republic, this happened before, like one time before in history. There was one superpower as great as the United States before in history, and that was Rome, and it was a republic, and it ran the show of the Mediterranean, which is the breadbasket of early civilization. When the republic dies, or when a government dies, the people, they become fascinated with things that are, I don't want to say occult, but strange, things that were not normal.
Taboo.
During the good times of the republic, and they break this frontier. So for one of the things is this fascination with gender that we're experiencing right now. They were experiencing the same thing at the in the death throes of the Republic. And this is because people are desperately searching anywhere for any meaning of anything. But that's just one example. And then we have like the example of the civil wars that preceded the fall of the Republic. And the civil wars created Caesar. Caesar himself was Roman middle class. His family they were called the equines. The equines, if you were an equine, basically it meant that you were rich enough to afford a horse. Because you could afford a horse,
like
you
equestrian.
Equestrian. That's, again, Latin. So yeah, semantics and Latin, they all play into everything. But yeah, equine means horse people, basically. Or equine means horse, but if you're being called that, you're horse people. If you owned a horse, you could be in the cavalry, and because you could be in the cavalry, you had a fast track to officerhood, and therefore, because you could be an officer in the military, you had political upward mobility. So Caesar's family, they backed a man named Marius during a political crisis that was going on. It was Marius versus this guy Sulla. Sulla's a general. Marius is a sort of a politician. And Sulla, he comes back to Rome and he literally marches an army to the gate. Marius kills himself. Sulla he doesn't really sack Rome. He just goes inside and takes power. And then Sulla, he's desperate. Or not desperate, he's a dictator, but he with all of his authority, he's going to smash out anybody who dare crossed him or made it difficult for him to get back there or who supported Marius at all. And Caesar's family had supported Marius relatively low, even because they weren't super rich. But because of this, Sulla instituted something called the prescriptions. The prescriptions was a state-sponsored bounty program where they literally brought up a list of names. They posted it in the Forum, which is a place in Rome. It's a public square, basically. It's like Twitter. But they put all the names on there, and then any Roman citizen, if your name was on the prescription, any Roman citizen could kill you and your family, and if they successfully killed you and all your heirs, so you and all your male heirs, then they were entitled to 50% of your estate, so everything you owned, and then the other half...
It's like The Purge, the movie, but with a bounty.
Right, and the other half went to the state. So this is another one of these simultaneous queen moves on the board that does two great things at once for the people in charge. Right. What is this doing? It's eliminating all of Sulla's enemies and also enriching himself. So sort of a genius move, but as Sulla, you can't keep your power forever. That's not the point. The point is that Caesar's family was put on the prescriptions, and Caesar's family was murdered. Caesar was put into hiding. He was 17 years old when his parents were murdered, and he was put into hiding. And because of this, he devoted his entire life to fighting against this established elite that would just kill people. I mean, just do the most terrible thing. I mean, he's just a boy, but I mean, God, his parents have just been killed because they gave some political money to some other guy, some guy who lost. So he saw the evils of the oligarchy, and Sulla, even though he was a general, he was part of the political elite still, and he devoted his entire life to defanging this beast, and so Sulla ends up creating Caesar by virtue of giving him his backstory, his heroic backstory, or his Batman origin story, right? And then Caesar ends up, again, I don't want to go too deep on Caesar right now, but Caesar ends up galvanizing the people in such a way that the establishment are terrified of him, because that's real power. Real power is being able to influence people, influence hearts and minds, not just purchasing it. And that's what really scared them. And so they conspired to murder Caesar. But the real point of this whole story is again, Caesar's a man of the people. They love him. He paid for their bread. When Caesar was murdered, he left 75% of it. He's the richest man ever. He left 3/4 of his wealth to every Roman citizen, the equivalent of like $30,000. That'd be like if Trump died and you got a check for $30,000. Yeah. Right.
Or a stimulus check.
Yeah.
Signed by him.
Except for the money actually existed, right? It was real gold. Caesar was a great man, is the point, and he was actually beloved, so beloved that they had to kill him, conspire to kill him, so that they could keep their power. And then the empire fell after, because now it's chaos. People love this guy, and he dies, and there's so much political turmoil and unrest that there's a civil war that cracks the republic in half and brings in this new age of governance, empire, which is just real authoritarian shit. But later on, during the monarchy of the British Empire, which took Rome, and that's, again, why Rome never died, is because it just kept changing hands to the top empire of the world. William Shakespeare writes the play Julius Caesar. And Julius Caesar, the play, is obviously based off of the real history that happened. But he writes Caesar, and again, really quickly, William Shakespeare was funded by the British Crown. The Globe, his famous theater that you read about in high school, was built by the Crown's money. And he just so happened to write this play, Julius Caesar, which is a retelling of history that paints Caesar as a tyrant, paints Caesar as the bad guy. And this is probably how you learned about Caesar in school, is that he was a tyrant, and he was power hungry, and nobody liked him, and he did terrible atrocities. None of that is true. That's all stemmed from a William Shakespeare play, which is not fact. But it's a convenient narrative for the great power at the time, or the monarchy, the people who control you, to put out this story about somebody who should be a real hero for you, somebody who came from the middle class, who just with his own wherewithal and intuition and wit beat them all at their own game. And it's just convenient that he's misremembered in such a way.
Yeah, I'll just add something real quick. That era is really interesting when Shakespeare was when he was writing his plays. One, because at the same time that his plays, Shakespeare, English was a new language, and it was pretty nebulous. There was, it was a combination of a bunch of different languages. So there was no grammar, there was no
Webster's dictionary,
there was no dictionary, there was no like set spelling. So for a long time, people would use Shakespeare to spell check and grammar check in English. So in a way, Shakespeare wrote and he made, people always talk about how he made like 100 words or whatever. At the same time, under the same king, King James, they translated the Bible from Latin to this new English. And there's evidence that the same people that wrote Shakespeare also wrote some of the first editions of the Bible. And mainly it's Francis Bacon, the Rosicrucians. Basically, they, in the same way that we have Hollywood, and we were talking about Hollywood does have some actors like George Lucas that they put in front of everybody, but really the scripts are coming from a whole group that's,
authoritative
Hollywood
from
is
some
full
other,
of occultists.
Yeah.
Hollywood
To
is
influence,
literally the type of wood that they made wands out of. The Druids of Britain made their wands out of. And actually, we get our
Is
first...
that what it's called? Hollywood?
Hollywood, yeah. That's what you make wands out of.
The Illuminati, they love to put these, I think these inferences and these little jokes, I mean, it's funny to me, to anybody, but
it's in your face.
They do this intentionally, and I think my theory of why they do all this is so that they can be remembered, because like we get to remember Julius Caesar, we get to know the real history, or at least we hope we do. Get to know the history of all these historical figures. But if a lot of these guys were doing what they were doing at the time, and we knew about, or people knew about it, they wouldn't be popular. Everybody would hate them. So I think that these sort of remembrances and these callbacks, I think partly it's very petty and egotistical on the people who are, the Rockefellers or whoever who's running the show, so that they can be remembered 500 years from now as like, oh yeah, what Rockefeller are we on now? Henry III or...
I don't even know if there's a prominent one right now.
There's definitely
John D. Rockefeller III he died at 101 years old after rumored to be multiple heart transplants.
No. Whatever Rockefeller we're on, he wants to be remembered as the Rockefeller that really did this in his time. It's all ego. It's all very simple human tendency. They're humans. They're not chaos. They are chaos magicians, but they're not anything special.
Little Easter eggs.
Yeah.
So let's wrap up that parallel to America. So then Shakespeare.
So now we have going on. Everybody calls
just on the Shakespeare thing. Why I brought that up was when the British Empire broke off from Rome. It was very recent from where they broke off. Henry VIII broke off from the Roman Catholic Church. So they had established their own church. They established their own language, their own culture, and that's why they wanted to paint Caesar as bad. That way it would take away where does Rome source its authority is from Julius Caesar. They kept Jesus Christ, but they got rid of the Julius Caesar part.
The other JC.
Yeah.
Bringing it back to modern times, bringing back this same story that keeps going on to where we are right now. A lot of people have this idea of Trump, that Trump is Caesar, and I don't think Trump is Caesar at all. It doesn't make sense in the timeline. I think that it's like a sort of a really low-hanging fruit to call Trump Caesar because Trump is like by the people, I guess, is the
populist.
Yeah, he's a pop, and that's what Caesar was. All of his policies are popular. He did public works projects. He did feeding the people. You know, this is like an actual solid guy. And Trump is similar, but I think Trump is much more the Sulla in relating. He's very fiery, and he's not tactful, and he's loved, but he's not loved like Caesar was. He's not. The establishment hates him, but the establishment hated Sulla. That's why they were backing Marius in the first place. But they had to sort of accept it because he brought an army to their gates. Trump is like Sulla because what Trump has done in his influence, whether good or bad, again, Sulla made Caesar. I think Trump is making the American Caesar, and just by through the osmosis of the chaos that's going on, of this civil war that nobody wants to really talk about. It's always, oh, hey, there's going to be another civil war. Now we're fighting one right now. It's just we don't fight the same as we did in World War II.
That's a good point.
The civil war that's going on right now is absolutely creating the American Caesar, and there will be somebody that is going to galvanize the people to completely cut the oligarchy to shreds, or be able to shred them so much so that they have to kill him. I think Kennedy would have been a better idea of a modern Caesar than
right,
Trump.
Yep.
But my point is just historically through the cycles, it all aligns that within these next 30 years, there will be the strong man made strong, strong man made strong by the weak times that we're in now, and that strong man will be the one that they will have to really contend with, and they won't be able to contend with him. They're gonna lose their standing in somewhat, just like the emperors got final say over the oligarchy of Rome back then.
The next chosen one.
The next chosen. Well, it's probably Musk, to be honest.
So,
but he can't be elected president.
JCs.
So
There's two JCs. So here's my take on that. We talked about the two JCs before. So you have Jesus Christ giving the religion and the kind of philosophy basis, and then you have Caesar, the military and the physical, political leadership. To compare, this is the reason why I like to compare Trump to Caesar, is because the Caesar, when Caesar started the Roman Civil War, he was voted out of power on January the 7th, 49 BC, and then he crossed the Rubicon. He didn't cross the Rubicon with his military, and that essentially started the Roman Civil War. Rubicon River up in North Italy, where you can't... there was a law you can't cross back with your military because they didn't want to.
You were no longer on campaign, therefore you couldn't be at the head of an army. If you were, you're considered an enemy of the state. So the Rubicon is an actual border that meant something to the. It's not just like, oh, he crossed the Rubicon. You know, people say that a lot, but it's.
So the thing is, Trump was voted out of power on January 7th, 2021, only because of the insurrection. If the insurrection wouldn't have happened, he would have been voted out of power on January 6th. The idea of this goes back to King James and Shakespeare and Francis Bacon was this concept, which you might be familiar with, for V for Vendetta. Have you seen that movie?
Of course.
So in that
More,
movie, an authoritarian government creates a pandemic to get more authoritarian control, and then the movie ends by a group of people being led by a guy with an anonymous character, goes by a single letter Q. I'm sorry, I meant V. And then the march on the Capitol.
I see what you did there.
That movie is based off of, and they're saying, remember the 5th of November, where the Jan 6 was saying, basically, remember the 3rd of November. But when that movie was based off of this Guy Fawkes story, which happened under King James at the same time. And the idea with the Guy Fawkes story is that he was going to, it's called the dynamite plot, he was going to blow up the Parliament building. Here's the thing. And once that happened, then King James used it to crack down control, take away power from Parliament and from his detractors, and gain more authoritarian control. Here's the thing. That story was fake. It was a false flag. The same, the story that V for Vendetta was based off of, that eventually, talking about chaos magic predictive programming, that Jan 6th was then the manifestation of, was originally based off of a false plot made up by Francis Bacon, King James, and that cohort of Rosicrucians, most accurately, because it's the same. Yeah, it's the same thing, and they're associated. Yeah, the Rose Cross, and that's that concept came first from Templars going on crusades and bringing back esoteric knowledge from the Middle East. But that's why I think it is accurate to say Trump is a Caesar. And there's also predictive programming. There's a book written in 1898.
I think they want you to think he's Caesar. Called
The Last President. And the book features a guy named Don. It features a guy named Don who lives on Fifth Avenue in New York City, and when he gets elected, the anti-fascist communist protest and break shit, and then the movie ends with him doing one final good thing. Then the Capitol explodes, and literally in the book it says a single eye rises over the ashes of the Capitol, which is the all-seeing eye.
Illuminati.
Yeah.
Well, to your previous point, wasn't Alan Moore, I think, is a creator, right, of V for Vendetta. He was also a practitioner or a student or whatever
of Aleister Crowley. Yep, he was a Crowley student, and
they all went to Hogwarts.
They all went to Hogwarts together. And they all ended up making pop culture.
Yeah, I think they want you to think that Trump is Caesar, though. I think they want you, by you, I mean the masses, because they want to subdue the tendency of the population that might produce the Caesar. They're trying to hedge their bet. That's
psyop the psyop.
Yes, yeah, because when you started involving yourself with all these like plots and like you said at the start of the podcast, when you get into propaganda, or you have to eventually propagandize the propaganda, or you have to have a conspiracy theory for the conspiracy theory. It's the same. That's the same sort of thing. It's like they fear. What's that saying? You fear the. I don't know. Doesn't matter. But they fear it so much that they're trying to stop it, before it happens. Like that's why they watch you. That's why they give you these powerful little devices, so that they can have everything you know, everything you are, everything you think, everything your location, all of it, so that they can nip you in the bud if you ever become a problem before you're a big enough problem to actually mess with them.
This is fucking wild. Like, we went down the rabbit hole and actually reached Wonderland type shit.
Yeah, yep, that's
it's not too wonderful, is it?
Wonderland.
Wonderland.
That book itself is Alice in Wonderland in itself is a rabbit hole, and the whole concept of in Chinese astrology, 2023 is as the year of the rabbit. And in Endgame, which I'm surprised I didn't bring this up, in Avengers Endgame, in the movie universe, it takes place in 2023. Mm-hmm. Not only that, and that's when they time travel. They time travel and they fix their universe in 2023, and to defeat Thanos, and that's when Iron Man sacrifices himself. In X-Men, which is also made by Stan Lee, same guy who wrote Iron Man and was in every Marvel movie up until Endgame because he died before the King was killed.
Game ended a little quicker for him.
But anyways, X-Men, there's X-Men, I think it's Days of Future Past, another time travel superhero movie, also takes place in 2023. So, also Matrix 1999 was also a cat slash cat. It's cat in Vietnamese astrology, rabbit in.
Yeah, my girl. You told me it was a cat. My girlfriend really got me with that one.
Well, no, yeah,
I was like, "Yeah, you're a cat," and she's like, "I'm a rabbit." I was like, "No. My buddy knows you're a cat." And then I looked it up, and it's a rabbit. I was like, "Oh fuck, Drew."
No,
I'm
it's
just
Vietnamese
kidding. It's
astrology.
because it's different.
No,
I know. I figured it out.
It's more accurate, but. But yeah, The Matrix, also 1999 movie, and in that movie, both rats and cats are important. The rabbit hole, the movie starts with, go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
You want to see how deep the rabbit hole goes?
Yeah.
And then black cats are used they're signs that the Matrix is being manipulated when they walk around.
Deja vu, yeah. That's crazy. When's another dog here, by the way? When we get our shot?
Oh, we're fucked, bro. Next year's the dragon year, and we're getting blown out. Unfortunately,
Yikes.
it's the worst.
Bro,
year out of the 12.
All right.
Yeah, buckle up.
Let's end this podcast so I can enjoy the rest of the year of
Gentlemen,
the rabbit.
Thank you so much for coming and making my head fucking spin. I don't know how the fuck I'm gonna get some sleep tonight, but this is fucking wild. Thank you so much for coming on. Plug your plugs. Where can people find you if you want to be found?
Awesome.
No.
Yeah, so at Drew Tang Reborn on Twitter, DRUTANGREBORN, and yeah, check me out there. That's basically it.
My Insta and Twitter are the same. It's Coopersa. It's COOPURSA. And I'll have some threads about Roman history coming out on Twitter, as well as like sort of equating it to the modern times. And then also I'm starting if you're local here in Miami, South Beach, starting a chess club. So I'll have that on there as well. Come join. It'll be cool if you're beginner, intermediate, but you got to learn what they're doing. You got to see what's going on so that you can make the best moves for yourself and navigate this crazy chaos magic that we all have to live under.
Shameless plug. I love it. Thank you all for tuning in. As always, as I said earlier, please like, subscribe, share, comment, do all the things, and maybe you'll catch us next year in the Year of the Dragon if we all survive to make a part 2 to all this.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Awesome.
Have you guys a good day. Y no se metan con nadie para que nadie se las meta.
Let's go.
That was good.
All right.
If you guys could look at this camera here and do a drop for your show. So what that means is maybe bring up one thing that you talked about in the show and then just like entice his audience.
Yeah, just like, hey, I'm Drew. Hey, I'm Cooper. If you want to tune into what Josue has to say.
Got it.
Cool. All right, I'll count you in. 5, 4, 3, 2.
Hey, I'm Drew, and we're talking about some wild concepts today. Why Elon Musk renamed Twitter X, and what his ultimate goals are.
At the same time, sorry. Hey, let's do that again. All right.
Okay.
My bad. I'm sorry.
I'm Cooper. And
Yeah, no.
You can.
I got you.
Can start because I already have his. So
Oh.
I'll just cut.
Oh, okay. Cool. Yeah, I thought you were gonna do.
No.
I thought they were separate. I'm sorry.
5, 4, 3, 2.
How we doing? I'm Cooper. Thanks for. How we doing? I'm Cooper. Tune into what Josue has to say. We're being magically chaotic, talking about conspiracies from 2000 all the way back to when time began.